Hello, good evening, and welcome back once again to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations and attacks that we're exposed to here in the 21st century, specifically with regard to the media, mainstream news, social media, and really all throughout the modern world. Last week, we began an examination of the state of the literacy rates among people in the United States, and how we have seen a seriously dramatic decline in the ability of many Americans to read and write the English language. We discussed the importance of being able to read and how the skill of reading has a direct correlation to our ability and our capacity for deeper logical reasoning. To read is quite literally to think, as it's through reading that we develop the neural pathways which strengthen our information processing such that we're able to discern meaning and accurately frame the context of our world. Likewise, the skill of writing enhances and strengthens our reasoning capacities to even greater degrees, as it's through writing that we practice and develop the skills to articulate and communicate our thoughts. When we're able to write well through the development of a large vocabulary and an adept understanding of the way our language functions, we gain so much in the way of accuracy of thought that the depths to which we may wish to express our inner perception of reality are really only limited by our capacity to abstract and create. The greatest writers throughout history were also some of the deepest thinkers. When we consider the likes of J.R.R. Tolkien or C.S. Lewis, we are engaging with men who delved to the extremes of what our language is capable of expressing. We could spend a lifetime reading their work and really never run dry of new and deeper ways of understanding the world. When we're able to read and to write, we hold the keys to expressing and understanding the truth of reality. All that's left is for us to embark on the journey of discovery through the written word. A friend of mine recently remarked in astonishment that Scripture tells us that God is the Word, not just in the English language, but the Logos, the divine Word of God. There's a great deal of depth to this concept, and one way to understand it is that through the Word, we are given a personal level of access to God's will and His revealing of truth regarding the way He has designed reality. His plans, His nature, and His love are communicated to us through language, and we draw closer to God when we read and seek out the depths of His words. For that to be the case, should we then be surprised to learn that men who have sought to remove God from our understanding about the world and usher in a materialist utopia controlled by a small class of ruling elites carried out plans to destroy our ability to read and engage with the written word? What levels of power, influence, and control might be achieved once generations of minds have been dulled beyond repair through the destruction of our language? How have they gotten away with it for so long? How do we learn to read? Or maybe a better question is to consider, how did you learn to read? There has been a clearly defined shift in methodologies over the years. If you can recall, please leave a comment about the ways that you were taught to read. I think it'll be a really interesting bit of info to learn about our community here at Minds on Guard. Recall from the video last week that we discussed the makeup of the English language and how it is an alphabetic system of phonetic sounds, which, when combined, form words that communicate information. Since all languages communicate information, the key distinctions are to be found in the systems by which the information is abstracted onto a page so that we're able to read and absorb whatever is being communicated. Our English alphabet is a truly remarkable system, as are all alphabetic systems in their own right, and it's crucially important to understand how each system is learned and understood at their operational levels. The reason for this is that our brains perform abstraction and make connections with regard to meaning based on specific factors within the environment and the kinds of stimuli that we're dealing with. Many people will be familiar with the notion that the two hemispheres of the brain perform different functions. Often people who are more creative or value lived experience in their personalities will refer to themselves as right-brained, while those with a more analytical, reasoned approach to life will be considered left-brain dominant. These distinct hemispheric differences are crucial to understand when it comes to the ways that we learn to read and write language, as the physiological needs and the pathways towards abstracting meaning will change depending on the system by which any language is organized. The human brain is a highly complex supercomputer and is capable of great feats. Yet, if we try to apply the wrong processing pathways to certain types of information, we will literally get our wires crossed, which leads to problems in learning and developing our minds well. A mentor of mine often makes the analogy of attempting to fix your car with a 9-iron. That golf club is an amazingly useful tool, given its proper application and the appropriate context, but a lousy one when applied to areas for which it has not been designed. In the book Crimes of the Educators, the authors examine the shift in the teaching of reading. We read there that one of the great unrecognized crimes being committed every day in our public schools is turning perfectly normal, intelligent children into dyslexics or lifelong functional illiterates. How is this done? Very simply, by using a sight or whole word method of teaching reading. The sight method of teaching reading was actually invented in the early 1800s by Reverend Thomas H. Gayaudet, founder of the Hartford Asylum for the Deaf and Dumb. Gayaudet thought that he could apply to normal children some of the techniques used in teaching deaf mutes to read. Reverend Gayaudet had found success in his methodology when it came to the teaching of deaf and mute children. The inherent limitation of the sensory capacities of these children meant that the traditional phonetics and auditory learning methods would never achieve learning, as the kids could not hear the sounds that each letter group carried. By applying combined rehearsal of equating pictures to whole words, the Reverend was able to teach the deaf children through the further development of already exercised learning pathways that had been forged through the sign language system. For children without the benefit of hearing, these methods gave them a way to achieve the levels of understanding that would not have been available otherwise. However, where the Reverend went wrong was in his assumption that his success with the deaf children would translate to even greater achievement in kids who could hear normally. In 1835, Gayaudet published his Mother's Primer, the first whole word primer to be published in America. Its first line reads, "Frank had a dog. His name was Spot." The dog Spot would later turn up in the Dick and Jane Look-Say readers. In 1836, the Boston Primary School Committee decided to try Gayaudet's primer on an experimental basis, and in the following year officially adopted it for use in Boston's primary schools. 7 years later, the decline in students' reading ability was so horrendous that a group of Boston schoolmasters published a blistering critique of the new method. The Boston schools got rid of the Gayaudet method and returned to the traditional method as used by Noah Webster and his celebrated blue-backed speller. The failure of the whole word method was clear, but it was not abandoned fully. The progressive educators forming the new American curriculum at Teachers College were very interested in the whole word methodology of teaching reading. James M. Cattell, a student of Wilhelm Wundt and experimental psychologist, had claimed to have discovered that adult humans read words as whole units or a kind of total word picture, much in the same way that Chinese characters are understood. Cattell reasoned that since adults read English in this way, it would be beneficial to teach children in the same system in order to speed up the learning process, which would achieve a higher skill level at even earlier ages. Of course, the major and fundamental flaw in this assertion is that experienced adult readers do not in fact read by a total word picture recognition method, but rather merely give off the appearance of such a process. What is actually happening in the adult reader's mind is the recognition of sounds based on phonetic systems that have been ingrained and trained to the point that the speed at which the reader is able to process the symbols on the page is happening so fast that we do not register the fundamental combinatorial processes in their component form. To overlook this logical pathway in the mind of a literate English speaker is a classic bias heuristic in that a misidentification of the complex processes of deeper thought are reduced to assumptions based on the best fit perceptions of the easily identifiable surface features being observed. What appears to be the case is not so when all factors of the historical and present context are accounted for. Yet, Cattell had declared his findings to be true, and through his position of authority in academia, along with direct access to the likes of John Dewey and the social progressives who had taken over the institutions of education in America, the whole word method of teaching reading was rolled out into the teachers' colleges and began to be implemented in the schoolrooms across the country. This was not an overnight, nationwide shift, but the plans had been put into motion. As we've discussed before, in order to change society at the level of the masses, the most effective methods are the slow and imperceptible shifts over generations. One of the first places this new method was applied was at the Rockefeller-funded Lincoln School in New York. Interestingly, John D. Jr. believed so much in the progressive methods of the Lincoln School that he sent 4 of his 5 sons there for their primary education. Even more interesting is that all 4 boys who went through the Lincoln School and were subjected to the progressive methods of education became dyslexic. The Rockefeller sons have gone on record declaring their struggles with reading and the kinds of difficulty that they have endured as a result of the whole word methods taught at the Lincoln School. Nelson Rockefeller, after becoming governor of New York, admitted that he had struggled with what he referred to as the handicap of being a poor reader while serving in public office. He said, "On many occasions, upon confronting an audience, I have elected to announce that I have thrown away my speech in favor of giving the audience the benefit of my spontaneous thoughts. And usually, I have added, besides, I went to a progressive school and don't read very well anyhow." This, of course, is a trial to my very able speechwriter, as well as a libel upon all the devoted teachers and professors who saw me through the years of my formal education. It is also usually a rather popular device, since it implies a desire to communicate with the audience on a much more intimate basis. But the truth is that it serves primarily to cover the fact that I really wish I could do a better job of reading a speech or other public statement. We are creating a nation of dyslexics. What began in the private schools through applied progressive experimental psychology has become the norm in most of the public schools of today. Interestingly, I know a family of 4 children who grew up going to school in 2 different public school districts in the late 80s and early 90s. The 2 who learned to read through auditory phonetics have no issues when it comes to reading and writing, while the 2 who were taught via whole word methods have been diagnosed as having dyslexia. This anecdote is not unique, and I'm sure we all know someone who shares similar experiences. Next week, we will look at what happens in the mind of a child who has been subjected to the abuse of being made into a dyslexic, and just why it has been allowed to continue unchecked for decades. Until then, stay safe, check in on your family and loved ones, and stay diligent and vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.